My Lords, I wasn't going to speak on this group, but I was provoked to do so into offering some reflections on the speech given by the noble Lord Russell of Liverpool, and especially his opening remarks about cars and planes, which he said were designed to be safe. He didn't mention trains, about which I know something as well. They're also designed to be safe, but these are just a few reflective points initially. They are designed in very, very different ways. An aeroplane is designed never to fail. A train is designed so that if it does fail, it will come to a stop. They are two totally different approaches to safety. And simply saying that something must be designed to be safe doesn't answer questions. It opens questions about what we actually mean by that. And the noble Lord went on to say that we don't allow children to drive cars and to fly planes. That's absolutely true. But the thrust of his amendment is that we should design the internet so that it can be driven by children, so that it can be used by children, so that it is designed for them. It is not designed for adults. And that is the problem I have with the general thrust of many of these amendments. A further reflection that came to mind as the noble Lord spoke was on a book of great interest, which I recommend to noble Lords, written in 1995 by Professor John Adams, still alive, then Professor of Geography at University College London, a book by the name of Risk. And he was a professor of, he is still an emeritus professor of geography at University College London. And it was a most interesting work on risk. First of all, it reflected how little we actually know. In many of the things for which we're trying to assess risk, how little we know. But more importantly, he went on to say that people have an appetite for risk. Now, that appetite for risk, that risk budget, so to speak, changes over the course of one's life. One has much less appetite for risk when one gets to a certain age than one had perhaps when one was young. I've never bungee jumped in my life, but I think I can give assurances to noble Lords that the time has come when I can say I never shall bungee jump. But there might have been a time when I was younger when I might have flung myself off a cliff attached to a rubber band and so forth. Noble Lords may have done so. Way that actually all you do is you go and you compensate for it by taking risks elsewhere, so that a country like New Zealand, which has some of the strictest cycling safety laws, also has very high incidences of bungee jumping amongst the young. If they can't take risks on their bicycles, they'll find ways of going and doing it elsewhere. And although these reflections are not directly germane to the amendments, they are important, I think, as we try to understand what we're seeking to achieve here, which is a sort of hermetically sealed absence of risk for children. I do not think, my Lords, it's going to work. I said at second reading that I thought the flavour of the debate was somewhat similar to a sort of late medieval conclave of clerics trying to work out how to mitigate the harmful effects of the invention of movable type. That didn't work either. And I think we're in a very similar position to that today as we discuss it. There's also the question of harm and what it means. I think while it's clear that the examples being given by my noble Lords are very specific and no doubt genuinely harmful and are the sorts of things we should like to stop, the drafting of the amendments in terms of the use of very vague words like harm is, I think, dangerous overreach in the bill. To give just one example for the sake of speed, when I was young, it was thought good for a child, periodically in certain circumstances, to administer the cane. In fact, the mantra was, spare the rod and spoil the child, though I never heard it said, but there we are. Nowadays, we would not think it good to do physical harm to a child. We would not think it morally good or psychologically good. We would regard that as an unmitigated harm. And although it's not necessarily banned or illegal, it's something that very...
Respond to him in two ways. Firstly, could I just ask him to reflect how the parents of some of the children who have died through what their parents would undoubtedly view as serious and unbearable harm, how they would feel about his sort of philosophical ruminations. But could I respond secondly, as somebody who has the privilege to be a Deputy Speaker in your Lordship's House, and to say it is incumbent and germane for all of us to focus on the amendment in question and to try and stay on it to save time and to get through the business.
Well, I must regard myself as doubly rebuked, and I think unfairly, because I do think that the reflections...
I'm going to speak after you, just so you know.
I do think that the reflections are very relevant to the amendments, and I have developed them in that direction. I also would say to the noble Lord, in respect of the parents, that they have suffered very, very cruelly and wrongly. But I will say again, though it may sound harsh, and I have said this on other matters in this House before, hard cases make bad law. And we are in the business here of trying to make good law that applies to the whole population. So I do not think that these are wholly...
Thank my noble friend very much for giving way. I just wondered if I could ask him whether, if he had the ability to, he would roll back the health and safety regulations for selling toys in the same way that he seems so happy to have no health and safety regulations for child's access to digital toys.
My lords, if the internet were a toy aimed at children and used only by children, then of course those remarks would be very relevant. But what we are dealing with is something of huge value and importance to adults as well. And it is the lack of consideration of the role of adults, the access for adults, and the effects on freedom of expression and freedom of speech implicit in these amendments that cause me so very much concern. I'm going to take issue now, for I seem to have upset everybody. So I'm now going to upset, if I may, the noble Baroness Lady Benjamin, with whom I haven't engaged on this topic so far. But both in second reading and earlier in committee, she used the phrase, childhood lasts a lifetime. Now, there are many people for whom this is a very chilling phrase. And we have an amendment in this group, a probing amendment granted from the noble Lord Knight of Weymouth, which seeks to block off access to VPNs as well. We are in danger of putting ourselves in the same position as China, with an hermetically sealed national internet in an attempt to put borders around it so that nobody can breach it. But of course, even in China, I'm assured it doesn't work, and clever and savvy people simply get round the barriers that the state has erected for them. If I can, before I sit down, redeem myself a little bit by giving some encouragement to the noble Baroness Lady Kidron, or rather I think the amendment is in the name of the noble Lord Russell of Liverpool, 28 and 32. These amendments, if we are to assess the danger posed by the internet to children, seek to substitute for the government's emphasis on the size of the provider an assessment rather of the riskiness of the provider. And as I said earlier in committee, I myself don't actually regard size as being a source of danger. And when it comes to many other services, I mentioned, do I buy my sandwich? When I buy my sandwich from Marks and Spencer's as opposed to a corner shop, do I feel which one of them is safer? Very often it's the bigger provider I feel is going to be the safer because I feel I can rely on their processes more. So on those two amendments in this group, 28 and 32, I'd certainly like to hear how my noble friend the Minister responds on that point and why the government continues to put such emphasis on size. But more broadly, I do want to say that in these attempts to protect children, understandably, we are in danger of using language that is far too loose and having an effect on adult access to the internet, which is not being considered in the course of this debate, or at least hasn't been until I have, however unwelcomely, raised it.
My Lords,